Have you ever found yourself in one of those political arguments that just goes nowhere? You know, the one where both sides are absolutely 100% convinced they're right, even when you're talking about super complex issues? Well, it turns out there's a fascinating psychological reason for that. Today, we're going to dive into a study that gets right to the heart of political extremism. And honestly, it might just change the way you think about your own opinions.
The researchers kick things off with this zinger from the philosopher Bertrand Russell, and it perfectly captures the big question they wanted to test. Is all that passion behind our strongest political views actually built on a solid foundation of knowledge, or is it something a whole lot shakier?
So this brings us to the core puzzle. All around us, we see these incredibly strong, polarized views on really complicated policies. But let's be honest, how many of us can truly explain the nuts and bolts of how those policies would actually work? That's the paradox these researchers wanted to get to the bottom of.
Okay, so here's the game plan. We'll start with this polarization puzzle itself. Then we'll dig into the core psychological idea here, the illusion of understanding. After that, we'll see how the researchers cleverly tested this by putting mechanisms up against reasons. We'll even find out if this changes what people do, not just what they think. And finally, we'll wrap up by talking about what all this means for our own political conversations. All right, let's jump right in with part one, the puzzle of polarization. There's this fundamental disconnect in modern politics that really sets the stage for everything else in this study.
I mean, think about it. Policies like a carbon cap-and-trade system or a national flat tax, these are incredibly complex. Even the top experts argue about the details. And yet, so many of us have these really strong black and white opinions about them. So you've got this paradox, right? Extreme confidence, but it's paired with very little detailed information. The researchers suspected the answer wasn't really about politics, but about psychology.
And that key psychological factor is this cognitive bias called the illusion of understanding. And it's something that affects all of us, not just in politics, but pretty much every day. The official term for it is the illusion of explanatory depth. It's that feeling we all get of knowing something, when what we really have is just a feeling of familiarity. We kind of assume we understand how something works, but that understanding is often paper thin. This is the classic example, and it's perfect. We all use a zipper, right? We feel like we know how it works. But if I asked you right now to explain, step by step, how the teeth interlock and pull together, you'd probably start to stumble a bit. That little moment of hesitation, that's the illusion shattering. So the researchers asked a brilliant question. Does this exact same illusion apply to our political beliefs? So how in the world do you actually test for this illusion? This is where the study gets really clever, with an experiment designed to see if this idea holds up in the political arena. Okay, so here's how the first experiment worked. First, they got participants to state their position on a policy, and then rate how well they thought they understood it. Then came the crucial part. They had to write out a detailed, step-by-step explanation of how that policy would actually work from start to finish. And finally, they were asked to re-rate their understanding and their initial position. And here is the first huge finding. Just like with the zipper, the moment people were forced to actually explain the mechanics of a policy, their confidence just plummeted. As you can see from the data here, their self-rated understanding dropped significantly once they were confronted with the gaps in their own knowledge. The illusion started to crack. But here's where it gets really interesting. It didn't just stop at their confidence. This drop had a direct effect on their political views. As people realized they understood the issue less than they first thought, their positions actually became less extreme. They literally moved away from the political fringes and closer to the middle. But the researchers were smart. They needed to know, was it just any kind of deep thinking that caused this, or was there something special about explaining the mechanism? So in the next experiment, they had one group explain the how, just like before, but they had a second group list the why, the reasons they held their position, which is way more about values and general feelings. And wow, the results were like night and day. Over on the left, you see the mechanism group showing that same pattern, trying to explain how they tank their confidence and moderates their position. But then look at the reasons group on the right. Listing why they believe something didn't reduce their confidence at all, and it had zero moderating effect on their position. This is the absolute key takeaway. Asking how and asking why lead to completely different places. This is all fascinating, but does it go beyond just checking a box on a survey? I mean, does this effect actually change how people behave in the real world? That's what the third and final experiment was designed to find out. So for this one, they really raised the stakes. After people either explained the mechanism,
the how, or listed their reasons, the why, they were offered a cash bonus. And they could choose to donate that bonus to an advocacy group that supported their side of the issue. So this was a real behavioral measure of their political conviction.
The results here are just striking. For the people who explained the mechanism, that's the solid line, having a strong initial opinion actually made them less likely to donate once their confidence was shaken. But for those who just listed their reasons, that's the dashed line, it had the complete opposite effect. It was like giving themselves a pep talk that just reinforced their conviction, making them more likely to donate. It's incredible, right? Two different ways of thinking led to completely opposite behaviors.
So let's pull all of this together. What do these findings actually mean for us, for the way we have political debates, and maybe for the health of our democracy?
So here's the big takeaway. A key driver of political polarization might not be malice or even deeply held ideology, but something way simpler, an illusion of understanding. We feel like we know way more than we actually do, and that unearned confidence is the fuel for extremism. And what's so powerful about this whole idea is that simply puncturing that illusion, just asking how, can act as a really important corrective. It can help counteract other well-known biases that push us apart, like confirmation bias or our tendency to just hang out in our own echo chambers. It forces a moment of what you might call intellectual humility. And this leaves us with a really powerful final thought. Just imagine our political debates for a second, on TV, on social media, even at the dinner table. What if, before we all launched into why we believe something, we all had to first answer the question, okay, but how would that actually work? This research suggests that one simple shift in focus could be a small but pretty powerful step towards a more thoughtful and maybe a less polarized world.